Dominic Ferraro wasn't a man who froze. In his world, hesitation meant death. But standing in JFK International Airport on a rainy November evening, his entire body locked up like someone had poured concrete into his veins. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos, announcements echoing overhead, kids crying, travelers rushing past with roller bags clicking against tile floors. Dominic had been focused on his phone, half listening to Antonio discuss a shipment problem, when something made him look up. That's when he saw her. Gate 47, maybe 50 feet away. Brown hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater he recognized because he'd bought it for her 2 Christmases ago. Natalie. His phone slipped from his fingers. Antonio caught it before it hit the ground, following his boss's frozen stare across the terminal. "Boss?" Antonio's voice sounded far away, like he was underwater. Dominic couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the woman he'd divorced 9 months ago, the woman he still dreamed about every single night, the woman he'd destroyed himself to protect. But Natalie wasn't alone. She was struggling with 2 infant car seats, one in each hand, a diaper bag sliding off her shoulder. Her face showed exhaustion in every line, dark circles under those green eyes he used to get lost in, her movements clumsy with tiredness as she tried to set both carriers down without dropping them. A stranger stopped to help her, an older woman who steadied one carrier while Natalie adjusted the other. Even from this distance, Dominic could see Natalie's grateful smile, could see her mouth forming thank you as she finally got both seats settled on the ground. That's when he saw inside the carriers. Babies. 2 of them. One bundled in a blue blanket, one in pink. Dominic's heart stopped beating. Actually stopped. His vision tunneled until all he could see was Natalie kneeling between those 2 car seats, her hand reaching out to adjust a tiny blanket. His mind started calculating without permission. 9 months since the divorce, but they'd been together 10 months ago, that last night before he'd forced himself to become someone she could hate. That night when he'd held her like he was drowning and she was air, memorizing every detail because he knew it would be the last time. The timeline fit. "Madonna Santa," Antonio whispered beside him, clearly doing the same math. "Boss, are those?" "I don't know." Dominic's voice came out rough, broken, but he did know. Something deep in his chest knew. The baby in the blue blanket started crying. Natalie immediately bent down, her tired face transforming with such pure love that Dominic felt something crack in his ribs. She lifted the carrier slightly, rocking it with a gentle motion, and even over the airport noise he could hear her soft voice soothing the child. She hadn't seen him yet. She was completely focused on her babies because they had to be hers. He could see it in every careful touch, trying to comfort one while keeping an eye on the other. Dominic's hands were shaking. His hands never shook. He'd stared down gun barrels without flinching, had made decisions that kept hundreds of people alive or sent enemies to their graves, had built an empire on steady nerves and steadier hands. But watching Natalie Ferraro, his mind corrected, even though she'd probably changed it back, watching her struggle alone with 2 infants made his hands shake like he was a kid again, scared and powerless. She shifted position, trying to dig something out of the diaper bag, and turned slightly in his direction. Their eyes met across the crowded terminal. Every sound in the airport disappeared. Every person faded into shadow. There was only Natalie, her green eyes going wide with shock, the color draining from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth formed his name, though he couldn't hear it. Dominic took his first step towards her. Then another. Natalie's hand gripped the nearest car seat so tight her knuckles went white. And Dominic kept walking, each step closing the distance to the only woman he'd ever loved and the 2 tiny humans who might, who could, who had to be his. 11 months earlier, Natalie sat in Trisha's sleek downtown apartment, crying into her 3rd cup of coffee. The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she couldn't appreciate the view. All she could see was the empty chair across from her at dinner last night. Their anniversary dinner. The one Dominic had missed. "He sent flowers," Trish said, not looking up from her phone. Her voice carried that edge it always had when they talked about Dominic. "Let me guess. Roses? With a card that said, 'Sorry, something came up'?" Natalie wiped her eyes. "Orchids, my favorite. And he called. He sounded really upset that he couldn't make it." But he still didn't make it. Trish finally looked at her, setting down her phone with deliberate precision. "Nat, we do this every week. You come here crying, I hand you tissues, and you defend him. When are you going to see what I saw with my ex? If a man wanted to be there, he would be there. Period." It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Trish stood up, pacing in front of her modern white couch. She'd redecorated after her divorce 2 years ago, erasing every trace of the husband who'd left her for his secretary. "I wasted 5 years making excuses for a man who didn't value me. Don't make my mistake." Natalie pulled her knees to her chest, feeling small in Trish's perfect apartment with her perfect post-divorce life. But Trish's life wasn't perfect. Natalie saw the loneliness behind the sharp words, the bitterness that had settled into her friend's bones like frost. "You don't understand what Dominic and I have," Natalie said softly. "When he's there, when he's really present, it's like nothing else exists. He looks at me like I'm his entire world." "And when he's not there, which is most of the time?" Trish sat back down, her expression softening slightly. "Honey, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to save you from the pain I went through. Love isn't enough. You need reliability, respect, someone who shows up." Natalie's mind drifted to last week. She'd been scared during a thunderstorm, a stupid childhood fear she'd never outgrown. Dominic had been out on business, but somehow he'd known. He'd come home at 2 in the morning, soaking wet from the rain, and climbed into bed with her. He'd held her until the storm passed, his fingers running through her hair, his heartbeat steady against her back. "You're doing it again," Trish said. "That look, you're remembering the good stuff and ignoring the pattern." "The good stuff matters." "Not if it's only 10% of your marriage," Trish leaned forward. "You deserve 100%, Natalie, not scraps, not apologies and flowers, an actual partner who comes home." Natalie thought about the empty side of the bed most nights, the dinner she ate alone, the gallery opening last month where she'd stood by herself while other artists introduced their spouses. She'd called Dominic 3 times. He never answered, but he'd sent a text at midnight. "So proud of you. Sorry I couldn't be there." "I started seeing a therapist," Natalie admitted quietly. Trish's face lit up. "Good. Finally. Maybe Dr. Whoever will help you see what I've been telling you. This marriage is already over, Nat. You're just too stubborn to admit it." "Dr. Frost, and she doesn't—" She stopped. Dr. Frost had actually said something different. She'd said that sometimes people who love each other still hurt each other, and the question wasn't whether to give up, but whether both people were willing to fight for something better. But Trish wouldn't understand that. Natalie left an hour later feeling worse than when she'd arrived. She always did after these talks, but Trish was her oldest friend. Trish had held her hair back in college when she got food poisoning. Trish had helped her move into her first apartment. Trish cared about her, even if her advice came wrapped in bitterness. When Natalie got home, she found Dominic waiting in the living room. His face transformed when she walked in. Pure relief, pure love, pure need. "I'm so sorry about last night." He crossed to her in 3 long strides. He pulled her into his arms, and she melted against him despite everything. "I love you more than anything in this entire world. You know that, right?" His heart thundered against her ear. And God help her, she believed him. Dominic stared at the photograph spread across his desk, and his blood turned to ice. Natalie. His Natalie. Laughing with a customer at her gallery, completely unaware of the telephoto lens capturing her every move. Another photo showed her at the coffee shop on 5th Street, the one she went to every Tuesday morning. A third caught her walking to her car in the dim parking garage, her arms full of groceries, vulnerable and alone. Each photograph had a message scrawled on the back in red ink. Beautiful wife. Be a shame if something happened to her. Giovanni Moretti's messenger had delivered them an hour ago with a smile that made Dominic want to break every bone in the man's face. "Boss," Antonio stood in the doorway of Dominic's office, his expression grim. "We need to talk about options." "There are no options." Dominic's voice came out flat, dead. He gathered the photos and shoved them into his desk drawer, unable to look at them anymore. Unable to see proof that his world had finally touched hers. "We could bring her in, tell her the truth, give her protection." "No." The word came out sharp as a gunshot. Dominic stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Natalie was living her life, painting and laughing and drinking her ridiculous caramel lattes. Still innocent, still clean. The moment she knows the truth, she becomes part of this. I won't do that to her. She's already part of it. She married you. She married a businessman with some questionable connections. Dominic's reflection stared back at him from the dark window, and he barely recognized the man looking back. She doesn't know about the territories, the shipments, the bodies. He'd kept her so carefully separate from his real life. Their penthouse was a sanctuary, a place where he could pretend to be normal, where he could hold her at night and forget about the blood on his hands, where her smile could make him believe he was someone worthy of her love. "The Morettis won't stop," Antonio said quietly. "You know Giovanni. He wants the Eastern Docks, and he'll use any leverage he can find." Dominic had already played out every scenario in his mind. If he increased Natalie's security, the Morettis would notice and push harder. If he brought her into his world, she'd see him for what he really was, a killer, a criminal, a man who'd built his empire on violence and fear. She'd look at him with those green eyes full of horror instead of love, and that would destroy him faster than any bullet. There was only one option that kept her safe and kept her innocent. He'd been avoiding it for 3 days, hoping another solution would present itself. But hope was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. "Call my lawyer," Dominic said, his voice hollow. "Tell him I need divorce papers drawn up immediately." Antonio's head snapped up. "What? Boss, no! There has to be another way." "If she's not my wife, she's not my weakness. The Morettis lose their leverage. She goes back to being nobody to them, just another civilian." "She'll hate you." "Good." Dominic's hands curled into fists against the windowsill. "She should hate me. It'll be easier for her to leave." "Dom." Antonio rarely used his first name. "You love her. This will destroy you both." Dominic thought about Natalie's face last week when he'd surprised her with tickets to the art exhibit she had wanted to see. Pure joy. She had thrown her arms around his neck and kissed him like he had given her the world, when really he had just given her scraps of the time she deserved. He thought about dancing with her in their living room at midnight, her feet on top of his, her laughter the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He thought about the way she touched his face when she thought he was sleeping, such tenderness in her fingers, like she was trying to memorize him. He thought about Giovanni Moretti's voice on the phone yesterday. 48 hours to seed the Eastern Docks, Ferraro, where that pretty little wife of yours learns what it means to be married to a man like you. We'll start with her fingers, send them to you, one at a time. "Get me the papers," Dominic repeated, his voice breaking. "I have 48 hours to save her life." Antonio left without another word. Dominic stood at the window and watched the city lights blur as tears he hadn't cried since childhood finally fell. Natalie stood in front of the stove, stirring Dominic's favorite pasta sauce, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. The dining table was set with candles. The good wine was breathing. and she'd even put on the dark green dress he loved. It had been a week since he'd really looked at her. 7 days of him sleeping in the guest room, of conversations that never went beyond good morning and I'll be late tonight. 7 days of feeling like a ghost in her own home. Trish's voice echoed in her head. He's having an affair, I can feel it. Why else would he suddenly stop touching you? But Natalie's heart refused to believe it. Something was wrong, yes, but not that. Never that. She'd seen the way Dominic looked at other women. He didn't. His eyes never wandered. When he was with her, even distracted and distant like he'd been lately, she was still his focus. Something else was happening. Something he wasn't telling her. Tonight, she'd find out what. She heard his key in the lock at 7:30. Right on time, which surprised her. She'd half expected him to be late, to have another excuse. Natalie? His voice carried from the entryway. In here. She heard his footsteps stop when he reached the dining room, heard his sharp intake of breath. She turned from the stove with what she hoped was a warm smile, but it faltered when she saw his face. He looked devastated. That was the only word for it. His dark eyes swept over the candles, the table, the effort she'd made, and something like agony crossed his features before his expression went carefully blank. What's all this? His voice was flat. Dinner. I thought we could talk. Really talk. She set down the spoon, wiping her hands on a towel. Dom, something's wrong. I can feel it. Please, just tell me what's happening. Whatever it is, we can fix it together. He stood frozen in the doorway, and she watched emotions flicker across his face so fast she couldn't identify them. Then his jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice was ice. We need to talk, but not about what you think. The knot in her stomach pulled tighter. Okay, let's sit down, have dinner, and... I'm not hungry. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Her heart started pounding before he even set it on the table. I need you to look at this. Natalie's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside were papers, legal papers with official letterhead and dense paragraphs of text. Her eyes caught on words, petition for dissolution of marriage. The room tilted. Divorce? She whispered. The words felt foreign in her mouth, impossible. She looked up at Dominic, waiting for him to tell her this was a mistake, a cruel joke, anything but real. His face was stone. Yes. I don't understand. Dom, what? Why would you? I don't love you anymore. 4 words. 4 simple words that shattered her entire world. That's not true. She was shaking her head, backing away from the table. That's not true. You're lying. I know you love me. I can feel it. Even this past week, even with the distance, I know. You don't know anything. His voice was cruel now, deliberately cruel, and each word was a knife. I made a mistake marrying you, Natalie. I thought I could make it work, but I can't. I'm tired of pretending. Tears streamed down her face. Look at me and say that. Really look at me and tell me you don't love me. For a moment, one brief, agonizing moment, his mask slipped. She saw pain in his eyes so raw it stole her breath, saw his hands clench at his sides like he was physically stopping himself from reaching for her. Then the mask slammed back down, harder than before. I don't love you, he said, looking directly into her eyes. You've been a burden, the crying, the neediness, the constant questions about where I am and what I'm doing. I'm exhausted, Natalie. I want my freedom back. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The candles she'd lit seemed to mock her, their romantic glow illuminating the destruction of everything she'd believed in. I don't believe you, she whispered, but her voice held no conviction. Sign the papers. He turned toward the door. My lawyer will handle everything. You'll be well taken care of financially. Dom, please! Don't make this harder than it needs to be. He paused in the doorway, his back to her, and you could have sworn he heard his voice break. Just sign the papers and move on. Forget about me. Then he was gone, Natalie stood alone in the dining room, the pasta sauce still simmering on the stove, the candles burning lower, and her whole world crumbling into ashes around her feet. 2 weeks after signing the divorce papers, Natalie woke up in her new apartment and barely made it to the bathroom before she was violently sick. She knelt on the cold tile floor, her forehead pressed against the toilet seat, and tried to remember if she'd eaten something bad. But she couldn't remember eating much of anything lately. Food had lost all taste. Everything had lost all meaning. This was the 4th morning in a row. "Nat?" Rebecca's voice called from the bedroom. Her friend had flown in from Seattle 3 days ago, worried after Natalie had stopped answering her calls. "You okay?" Natalie wanted to laugh. Was she okay? Her husband, ex-husband, had thrown her away like garbage. She'd moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's cat. Her art gallery was failing because she couldn't focus on anything. Trish kept saying, "I told you so," every time they talked. No, she wasn't okay. "Just sick," she managed to call back. Rebecca appeared in the bathroom doorway, her nurse instincts already activated. She pressed her hand to Natalie's forehead, checking for fever, then helped her sit back against the bathtub. "How long has this been going on?" "A few days, maybe a week." Time had become meaningless, the days blurred together in a haze of grief and confusion. Rebecca's eyes narrowed in that clinical way she had. "Any other symptoms? Fatigue, dizziness, food aversions?" "I'm just sick from stress, the divorce." "When was your last period?" Natalie's mind went blank. She tried to think back, but the past month was a fog. Before the divorce? After? She honestly couldn't remember. "I don't know," she whispered. Rebecca was already standing, heading for the door. "I'm going to the pharmacy. Don't move." "Rebecca, it's not." But her friend was gone. Natalie sat on the bathroom floor, her mind refusing to process what Rebecca was suggesting. She couldn't be pregnant. That would be too cruel. The universe couldn't possibly be that twisted. But her hand moved to her stomach anyway, and she thought about that last night with Dominic. 10 months ago, before everything fell apart, before he became a stranger. They'd made love like they were saying goodbye, though she hadn't known it at the time. He'd been so intense, so present, holding her like she might disappear. He'd kissed every inch of her skin, whispered her name like a prayer, and when she'd fallen asleep in his arms, she'd felt completely safe. 2 days later, he'd started sleeping in the guest room. Rebecca returned 20 minutes later with a pharmacy bag. She pulled out 3 different pregnancy tests. "We're taking all of them right now." "Rebecca!" "Now, Natalie." Her hands shook as she opened the first box. The instructions blurred through her tears. Rebecca had to read them out loud, had to help her steady her hands enough to take the test. 3 minutes. The box said to wait 3 minutes. Natalie sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the little plastic stick on the counter. Rebecca stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. "What if it's positive?" Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. "How can I raise a baby alone? He doesn't want me. He made that perfectly clear." "Then he's an idiot, and you'll raise this baby with people who actually love you." Rebecca squeezed her shoulder. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves." The timer on Rebecca's phone went off. Natalie couldn't look. Rebecca picked up the test, and her sharp intake of breath told Natalie everything she needed to know. "Positive," Rebecca said softly. The world tilted. Natalie took the test with trembling hands, stared at the 2 pink lines that were changing everything. "Take the others," Rebecca said gently, "just to be sure." All 3 tests came back positive. Natalie made a doctor's appointment the next day, still in shock, still unable to process the reality. At the appointment, the ultrasound technician moved the wand over her barely there belly, and Natalie watched the fuzzy screen without understanding what she was seeing. "Well," the technician said with a smile, "congratulations, you're measuring about 8 weeks, and it looks like—" She moved the wand, clicking buttons on her keyboard. "Yes, twins. You're having twins." Natalie's vision blurred. Twins. 2 babies. Dominic's babies. "Are you okay, honey?" the technician asked, concerned. "Do you need a moment?" Rebecca gripped her hand tightly. Natalie stared at the screen, at the 2 tiny fluttering heartbeats, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, expanding, making room. "I need to tell him. These are his children. He has a right to know." Rebecca nodded. "We'll try." They tried that afternoon. Natalie called Dominic's number with shaking hands. "The number you have reached has been disconnected." She went to the rent house, the home they'd shared. The security guard at the desk checked his computer when she asked to go up. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Ferraro has left explicit instructions. You're not authorized." "Please." Tears streamed down her face. "Just call him. Tell him I need to speak to him. It's an emergency." "I can't do that, ma'am. I have my orders. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Natalie tried 3 more times over the next week. Different security guards, same answer. She went to the restaurant where Dominic sometimes had business meetings. The owner recognized her, but said he hadn't seen Mr. Ferraro in weeks. She was being erased from his life, systematically and completely. One night, 2 weeks later, she sat in her apartment with her hand on her growing belly. Rebecca had gone back to Seattle but called every day. Trish had told her to think practically and consider her options, which made her stop taking her calls. "It's just us," she whispered to the twins. "But I promise you I'll love you enough for 2 parents. I promise I'll be strong." She made her decision that night. She'd leave New York, accept Rebecca's offer to stay in Seattle, and build a new life. A life without Dominic Ferraro. The next morning, she wrote him a letter. She told him about the pregnancy, about the twins, about how much she wished things were different. She put it in an envelope and took it to the penthouse one last time. "Please," she begged the security guard, "please make sure he gets this. It's important, life-changing important." The younger security guard, one she hadn't seen before, looked at her tear-stained face and nodded. "I'll make sure it reaches him, ma'am. I promise." Natalie left, believing her words would finally reach Dominic. She didn't see the man in the dark coat who'd been watching from across the street, didn't see him approach the security desk an hour later, flashing a badge that looked official, but wasn't, didn't see him take the letter with Dominic's name on it. In an alley 3 blocks away, the man opened the envelope, read the letter about pregnancy and twins and desperate love, and smiled. Giovanni Moretti would pay well for this information. Then he lit a match and watched Natalie's words turn to ash. Dominic never knew she'd tried to tell him. The airport terminal snapped back into focus, people rushing past with luggage, announcements echoing overhead, the smell of coffee and pretzels from nearby vendors. But all Natalie could see was Dominic, standing 3 feet away, staring at her babies like he'd seen a ghost. "Are they mine?" His voice came out rough, broken. Natalie's throat closed up. Every cell in her body screamed at her to grab the twins and run, to protect them from the man who'd destroyed her. But Luca chose that moment to let out a small cry, and Dominic's eyes tracked to the sound with such raw longing that it stole her breath. She couldn't lie. Not about this. She nodded. Dominic's knees actually buckled. He caught himself against a nearby pillar, one hand pressed to his chest like he couldn't breathe. Antonio appeared at his side, steadying him, looking between Natalie and the babies with wide eyes. "How old?" Dominic's voice was barely a whisper. 8 months. Natalie's hands tightened on the carrier handles. Luca and Lucia, they turned 8 months last week. She watched him do the math, watched the realization cross his face. He'd had children for 8 months and never knew. Watched pain and wonder and devastation war in those dark eyes she'd once loved more than breathing. "You were pregnant." He pushed away from the pillar, taking a step toward her. "When I gave you the papers, when we divorced, you were already pregnant." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I didn't know yet. I found out 2 weeks after." 2 weeks? His voice rose slightly, drawing looks from passing travelers. "You've known for 9 months, and I'm just finding out now?" The injustice of his tone snapped something inside her. 9 months of struggle, of fear, of raising 2 babies alone, and he dared to sound accusatory? "I tried to tell you." Her voice cracked, tears spilling over. "I called you. Your number was disconnected. I came to the penthouse. Your security wouldn't let me up. I left you a letter." "What letter?" Dominic stepped closer. "I never got a letter." "I gave it to the security guard. I begged him to make sure you got it." The memory of that day crashed over her, how desperate she'd been, how the guard had promised. "I told you about the babies, about how scared I was, about how I needed you even though you'd thrown me away like I was nothing." People were definitely staring now. A mother pulled her child closer, moving away from the drama, but Natalie didn't care. 9 months of pain were pouring out of her and she couldn't stop it. "You made it impossible to reach you," she continued, her voice rising. "You changed my number. You told security to keep me out. You erased me from your life so completely that I couldn't tell you that you were going to be a father. I went through pregnancy alone. Alone, Dominic. Do you know how terrifying it is to find out you're having twins with no one to help you? No one to hold your hand at ultrasounds. No one to help you when you were so sick you couldn't stand?" Lucia started crying at the sound of Natalie's raised voice. Natalie immediately bent down, soothing her daughter with gentle sounds, but the tears kept falling. Dominic looked shattered. "I never got a letter. I swear to God, Natalie, I never knew you tried to contact me. I changed my number to protect you. I told security to keep you away because I thought it would keep you safe." "Safe from what?" She straightened, holding Lucia's carrier. "You keep saying that, but safe from what?" Dominic glanced around the crowded terminal. "I can't explain here. It's not safe to—" "Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Seattle. All remaining passengers please proceed to Gate 47 immediately." Natalie looked at the gate, then at Dominic, then at her babies. Rebecca was waiting in Seattle. Her new life was waiting, the safe, quiet existence she'd built away from the pain. But Dominic was looking at the twins like they were miracles, like he was a drowning man who'd just been shown air. "Please." He dropped to his knees right there in JFK International Airport in front of hundreds of strangers. Tears streamed down his face, the first time he'd ever seen him cry. "Please don't get on that plane. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know I destroyed everything. But please, Natalie, give me 1 hour to explain everything. Every secret, every lie, every reason you destroyed our marriage. And then I decide if you ever see them again." The powerful, dangerous man she'd married was on his knees in public, begging. Around them, people had stopped to watch. Someone had their phone out, recording. But Dominic didn't care. 9 months of pain were pouring out of her and she couldn't stop it. Dominic closed his eyes, relief washing over his features. "Thank you. Thank you." He stood slowly, and Antonio materialized beside him, speaking quietly. Dominic nodded, then turned back to Natalie. "There's a private lounge, away from the crowds. We can talk there." Natalie adjusted her grip on both carriers, and Dominic automatically reached to help. She flinched back instinctively, and the pain that crossed his face was so raw she almost apologized. "I can carry one," he said quietly. "Please." After a long moment, she nodded. Dominic bent down and carefully, reverently picked up Luca's carrier. His hands shook as he lifted his son for the first time. And Natalie followed the man who'd broken her heart deeper into the airport, toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. The private lounge was quiet, separated from the terminal chaos by thick glass walls. Dominic set Luca's carrier down with extreme care, like he was handling the most precious thing in the world, because he was. Natalie placed Lucia beside her brother and sank into a leather chair, exhaustion and emotion weighing her down. Both babies had fallen asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. "Talk," she said. "You have 1 hour." Dominic pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He scrolled through old photos, then handed it to her. "This is why I divorced you." Natalie's blood turned to ice. The screen showed surveillance photos of her, at her gallery, at the coffee shop, walking to her car. Each one had a message scrawled in red. "Beautiful wife, be a shame if something happened to her." "The Moretti family," Dominic said, his voice hollow. They were a rival organization. They wanted my territory, and they found my weakness, you. He told her everything, about his real business, about the violence she'd been sheltered from, about the explicit death threats. He showed her more messages, detailed descriptions of what they'd do to her if he didn't comply. Giovanni Moretti called me, Dominic continued, and his voice cracked. He said I had 48 hours to give up the Eastern docks, or they'd start sending me your fingers, one at a time. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't. He stopped, fighting for composure. Divorcing you was the only way to make you irrelevant to them. If you weren't my wife, you weren't leverage. I had to make you hate me enough to leave, to disappear where they couldn't find you. You could have told me, Natalie whispered. We could have faced it together. I was terrified you'd die while I was trying to explain, and I couldn't. His voice broke completely. I couldn't let you see what I really am. A killer, a criminal. I loved you too much to taint you with that truth. Tears streamed down both their faces. The babies slept peacefully between them, unaware their parents' hearts were breaking and mending simultaneously. I tried to tell you about them. I swear I tried. I know. I believe you. Dominic's hands clenched into fists. Someone intercepted that letter, kept it from me. I'll find out who. Dom, she stopped him with his name. What happens now? Are we still in danger? Antonio appeared in the doorway then, his face urgent. Boss, we have a situation. 2 Moretti guys in the terminal. They're heading this way. Dominic stood immediately, positioning himself between Natalie and the door. Every soft emotion vanished, replaced by the dangerous man she'd glimpsed but never fully seen. Get them out of here, Antonio, he ordered. Service exit, now. Wait, Antonio held up his phone. They're not armed, and they're holding up their hands. I think they want to talk. Moments later, 2 men entered the lounge, hands raised peacefully. Dominic kept himself planted protectively in front of his family. Mr. Ferraro, we're not here to fight. One of the men said carefully, Giovanni sent us to deliver a message. Giovanni can go to hell. Giovanni is dead, sir. Killed 3 days ago by the Calabrese family in a territory dispute. The Morettis are scattered. The organization is falling apart. He pulled out his phone, showing news articles, proof of death. The vendetta against you dies with him. We're out. It's over. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dominic stood frozen, processing. The threat that had destroyed his marriage, that had stolen 9 months with their children, was gone, just like that. The bitter irony crushed him. He'd sacrificed everything for nothing. The men left. The lounge fell silent except for soft baby sounds. It's over? Natalie's voice was small. It's over, Dominic confirmed, turning to face her. The anguish on his face was devastating. I destroyed us for a threat that doesn't exist anymore. They stared at each other across the impossible distance of 9 months of pain. Luca woke up then, fussing softly. Without thinking, both parents reached for him. Their hands touched over the carrier and they froze. Can I hold him? Dominic asked, his voice breaking. Please. Natalie lifted Luca out and placed him carefully in Dominic's arms. Watching this dangerous, powerful man cradle their tiny son with infinite gentleness, tears streaming down his face as Luca grabbed his finger with an impossibly small hand, something shifted in Natalie's chest. I never stopped loving you, Dominic whispered, not looking away from Luca's face. Every single day I wanted to come find you, to tell you the truth, but I thought you were safer without me. I never stopped loving you either, Natalie admitted, even when I hated you, even when I wanted to hate you. Lucia started crying and Natalie picked her up, settling beside Dominic. They sat together, each holding a baby, the family they'd made visible between them. I don't expect you to forgive me, Dominic said. I don't expect you to trust me again right away, but I'm begging you, let me be their father. Let me prove I can be the man you all deserve. Natalie looked at him holding Luca, saw the pure love radiating from him, and made her choice. I'm not promising anything, she said carefully. I'm not saying we're getting back together tomorrow. You broke my trust, and that takes time to rebuild. I know. but I'm willing to try for them." She looked at Lucia, then at him, "and maybe for us." Hope blazed across his face. "What do you need? Name it. Anything." "Truth. Complete honesty from now on. No more secrets, no more decisions made without me." Her voice strengthened. "And therapy, for both of us, together and separate." "Done. Anything else?" "Time. This doesn't get fixed in a day." "I'll wait as long as it takes." He shifted Luca gently, and our son yawned, content in his father's arms. "I have the rest of my life to make this right." Antonio appeared again. "Boss, I called ahead. The house by the lake is ready whenever you are." Dominic looked at Natalie questioningly. She nodded slowly. They gathered the babies and their things. As they walked through the airport together, not quite touching, but not quite separate either, Natalie felt something she hadn't in 9 months. Hope. The safe house was beautiful, peaceful, far from the city's dangers. As the sun set over the lake, they sat together on the porch. Dominic fed Luca a bottle, his hands steady now, tears of joy and regret mixing on his face. "What are they like? Tell me everything I missed." And Natalie did. She told him about the pregnancy, about their first cries, about Lucia's smile and Luca's stubborn personality. She showed him videos on her phone, first bath, first laugh, every milestone he'd missed. He absorbed every detail like a man dying of thirst. "I'm so sorry for all of it, for every moment I wasn't there." "I know." And she did. She could see his genuine remorse, his desperate love. "We can't change the past, but we can decide what happens next." Dominic looked at her, at their children, at the second chance he didn't deserve but would fight for anyway. "I love you," he said. "I never stopped. I never will." Natalie's heart, so carefully guarded for 9 months, cracked open just enough to let a sliver of light through. "I love you too," she admitted. "That's why this hurts so much. I'll spend the rest of my life earning back your trust." "Good," she managed a small smile, "because these two deserve both their parents, together." As night fell over the lake, they stayed on the porch, 2 broken people holding 2 perfect babies, learning how to be a family again. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard conversations, painful memories to work through, trust to rebuild brick by brick. But watching Dominic kiss Lucia's forehead with such tender devotion, seeing him look at her with love that actually never died, Natalie believed it was possible. They'd lost 9 months, but they had the rest of their lives. And this time, they'd face it together. The end.